In any project, what's that one thing that can quietly derail your budget, crush your timeline, and just completely demotivate your team? Well, it's the second of the 8 wastes, defects. So today, we're not just going to define what defects are. We're going to expose the true, staggering cost of all that rework, and most importantly, what you can actually do to stop it.
Welcome to Bodhi Unified Flow. And here, our mission is pretty simple. We simplify complexity and amplify performance. And today, we are untangling one of the most complex, most costly wastes in any system. You guessed it, defects. So here's what we've got lined up. First, we'll get into the hidden threat that defects pose. Then, we'll nail down exactly what we mean by scrap and rework before we look at the massive ripple effect of their costs. From there, we'll unmask the root causes, introduce some really powerful lean tools to prevent them, and finally, wrap it all up by talking about what it takes to build a real culture of quality.
All right, before we dive deep, let me ask you this. What if the smallest, tiniest little error was secretly the biggest threat to your project's success? Now, that might sound a little dramatic, right? But as we're about to see, that tiny mistake can kick off a huge cascade of really costly consequences.
Okay, let's jump right into our first section, the hidden threat of defects. So why do we use a word like insidious? Well, it's because, unlike other wastes you can easily spot, the real damage from a defect is often hidden, spreading silently right through your entire operation. To really get a handle on defects, we first need to be clear on what we mean by waste, or MUDA, as it's called in Lean. Put simply, it's any activity that eats up resources, time, money, materials, but adds zero value from your customer's perspective. Think of it this way. It's all the stuff the customer would never, ever want to pay for if they knew about it. And this, right here, is the heart of the problem. A defect isn't just a one-off mistake. It's the genesis of a compounding cycle. It's like a snowball rolling downhill. Each error kicks off a chain reaction, draining your resources and absolutely crushing productivity along the way. Okay, so let's get our terms straight, because every single defect leads to one of two very costly outcomes. It either becomes scrap or it requires rework. So, what are we really talking about when we say defect? In the lean world, it's any output, any at all, that fails to meet the standard. And this isn't just about a faulty part on an assembly line. It could be a blueprint with a wrong measurement, or even just an invoice with the wrong number. If it wasn't done right the first time, it's a defect. Simple as that.
So, once a defect happens, you're basically stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one side, you've got scrap. The thing is so flawed, it's a total loss. You just have to throw it away. On the other side, you've got rework, where you have to pour even more time, money, and materials into fixing the original mistake. Either way, you're just creating more waste.
And this brings us right to the core of it all, the true cost. We're going to see how a single, simple error creates this massive ripple effect with absolutely staggering financial and operational consequences. You know, this image really says it all, doesn't it? A defect is just like a stone you toss into a pond. That initial mistake, that's just a splash. The real damage, the real cost, comes from those ripples that spread out, disrupting schedules, bloating budgets, and hurting everything from team morale to your customer's trust. Okay, let's talk real numbers for a second, because this is wild. Research shows that a staggering 30% of all work in the construction industry is rework. Just let that sink in for a moment. Nearly a third of every bit of effort is spent just fixing stuff that wasn't done right the first time around.
So, what does that 30% cost us? A whopping $15 billion. And that's the estimated annual loss just in the U.S. industrial construction sector. It's an almost unimaginable amount of pure, unadulterated waste.
But honestly, that huge number, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The hidden costs can be even more damaging. You've got a team that's just demoralized, right? Tired of fixing the same old mistakes. You've lost production capacity, projects are delayed, customers are frustrated, and your brand reputation takes a serious hit. These are the costs that don't always show up on a balance sheet, but they are absolutely real. And here's something absolutely crucial to understand about the cost. It's not a simple linear problem. As this chart clearly shows, the more defects you have, the more expensive each individual one becomes to fix. The problem doesn't just grow, it compounds. It gets exponentially worse.
All right, so we've clearly established that defects are a massive, costly problem. The next logical question is, why? Why does this keep happening?
let's move on and unmask the real root causes.
You know, when you start digging into the common causes, a really clear pattern starts to show up. It's almost never about a lack of skill or someone not trying hard enough. The real culprits are breakdowns in process and information, misunderstandings, bad drawings, poor communication. See the pattern? It's about the system breaking down.
So, how do we fight back? This brings us to the good part, the solutions. In this section, we're going to explore some lean tools that help us shift our entire mindset, moving away from just finding mistakes to actively preventing them from ever happening.
The bedrock of preventing defects is something called root cause analysis, or RCA. And this isn't about just putting a bandage on the symptom. It's about being a detective, digging past the obvious clues to find the fundamental reason a problem occurred, so you can eliminate it for good.
And one of the most powerful and honestly simplest tools for this is the 5 whys. Let's walk through it. A part was made wrong. Why? Machine settings were off. Okay, why were the settings off? The operator used the wrong spec sheet. Why did they use the wrong one? The latest spec sheets aren't easy to get to. Boom, there it is. The root cause isn't operator error, it's a broken document control process. By just asking why a few times, we went from blaming a person to fixing a system.
Okay, next up is a really cool concept from Japan called poka-yoke, which basically means error-proofing. And the idea behind it is just brilliant. Instead of training people not to make mistakes, you design the process itself so that it's physically impossible for the error to happen. The classic example is a USB cable. You can only plug it in one way. That's poka-yoke in action.
Now, these tools are fantastic, but they only really work if they're supported by the right culture. So in our final section, let's talk about the glue that holds all of this together, building a culture of quality by making that big shift from a reactive to a proactive mindset.
And it really all boils down to 2 totally different ways of thinking. The old reactive approach inspects for quality at the very end of the line, which is basically planning to fail and then trying to clean up the mess. The proactive, lean approach builds quality into every single step of the process right from the start. You design a system where defects are a rare surprise, not a daily expectation.
So I want to leave you with a question to take back to your team, maybe even to your next meeting. This is about so much more than just tools. It's a fundamental change in how we think. How can you start, like today, to move your team from a culture that's just good at catching defects to one that's brilliant at preventing them entirely?